Whether or not it's GMO, I mean, isn't...
I don't know the answer to that. I know for like corn and soy and stuff, I think like 90% plus are GMO.
Right.
Oh, okay.
So if you're eating any corn-based product, and maybe there's something to be said there. If the process of GMO makes corn more available in our diet, and that meaningfully shifts the overall food profile that we're eating, maybe that shift has an impact on our dietary intake overall as a culture.
True.
It has nothing to do with the corn itself versus an unmodified corn.
Right. And by the way, I don't know if you've ever seen heirloom corn, but screw that crap, okay? Like the corn that's modified is juicy and delicious.
Yeah, and sweet and everything. And
Not
large.
not this pink and purple and blue shriveled up little thing that you know they call corn.
Yeah.
So
I think there's very little food sold in a supermarket that matches its ungenetically modified
Ancestor?
ancestor.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
So all of them. So if it's not laboratory GMO, it'd be farmer GMO.
Right.
Right.
Because at some point
Selected over centuries.
Exactly.
And I don't have people say they should label the food if it's GMO. And while that's surely not necessary, if you did do that, I would say label it so GMO and then have one branch say, and is it scientist GMO or is it farmer GMO?
Right.
And then every food item in the
would be GMO.
would be GMO of some kind.
Anytime you make a hybrid or crossbreed or do anything like that, you're genetically modifying the plant. So
It's carrots, isn't it? Carrots originally were purple.
yeah, by the way, I love purple carrots. Yeah.
There you go. Right, moving on. What about fluoride in the water?
These types of broader public health initiatives, if you take them away, it's not going to harm everyone equally, assuming there is a benefit.
Interesting.
Who's it going to most deeply impact? The people who have least access to dental care, who have least access to fluoridated toothpaste and regular toothbrushing, right? There's a large chunk of society who possibly wouldn't see as much of a big health impact compared to another section of society who may see massive
And
disproportionate
that dialogue,
impacts.
that's never discussed. Nobody ever talks about
Right.
that.
Right.
Yeah.
And certainly, if you happen to be in a very privileged stance, you can't decide just based on yourself for very broad
you
public
shouldn't.
health measures. You shouldn't.
Yeah.
You certainly can, and people often do.
Yeah,
Keep
so
going.
following up on your sort of comment and clever as it was, what are some of the red flags that content might be misinformed?
Oh, good.
What gets your ears pricked up and go, oh, hello?
Good stuff.
Yeah, it's a strong overlap with the type of content that is very intriguing to watch. And so you'll see anecdotes being presented. I have 3 friends who had very late stage cancer.
Right.
They took XYZ medications, and now none of them have cancer.
Hydroxychloroquine. Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't going to name medications.
Yeah.
This isn't a different podcast where that is frequently done. So anecdotes being presented in place of evidence is an immediate red flag, but it's also really
But they
compelling.
think it's evidence. They think it's evidence when they present an anecdote.
And there's a saying, the plural of anecdotes is not data.
Nice. I need that on a T-shirt. Yes, but only scientists have even their slogans are boring. The plural of anecdotes is not data, which is beautiful to say. I wish most people got it though.
Yeah, and it's not a replacement for a controlled clinical study where you're monitoring all these different variables that otherwise can easily confound whatever you're looking at.
Right. What I tell people when they say, oh, I have an aunt who took this herbal cure for cancer and she's doing just fine right now. And I say, the 9 people who took that herbal cure and are now dead are not being interviewed by anybody.
No.
How much of what gets put out on social media has behind it a conflict of interest?
That's a major red flag. So if you see somebody telling you, oh, this autoimmune disease and this cancer and this heart disease are all due to a deficiency in these 3 vitamins, which if you go to the link in my bio, I happen to be selling in a vial for $90 per month. Can you really trust that these very broad statements, first of all, making broad statements like that, there's a reason why people see individual nutritionists and dietitians and doctors. It's because you can't give prescriptive advice like if you take more vitamin D, you can solve your autoimmune disease. That's simply not true. But if you're selling a vitamin D capsule, you're very motivated to make that type of statement.
Okay, so that's another red flag.
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
However, just because they're selling it to you doesn't mean it doesn't work.
Correct.
So this would only mean you just want to be a little more cautious.
Right.
But it's not an immediate disqualifying event.
Exactly. So I would start from a place of skepticism to start. And then if you see, oh, there's conflict of interest, and they're presenting only anecdotes, and they're being sensationalized and exaggerating, and they're claiming that this one particular treatment is helping with 5 different diseases,
And they're really charismatic.
and they're really charismatic, then your guardrails should be almost at the roof.
Wow. Okay.
So that's the the universal cure-all tablet, potion, lotion.
Yeah, if somebody's selling you something and they say you've got autoimmune disease or heart disease or cancer or you're feeling depressed, maybe you need more of this thing that costs $100 a
Isn't
month.
this the same as the dude that sells elixirs?
The
and
tonic.
The tonic?
Yes.
From the back of the wagon?
Right.
The
in
snake oil
1880s?
salesman.
Snake oil, yeah.
Exactly
Isn't that the
it.
same thing, but on the internet today?
Well, they're working in the same principles.
The
You're
same
working
principle.
to the same audience.
Same. We're all
And
still
they're
human.
vulnerable to those
Susceptible
tactics.
humans.
Yeah.
And that's exactly it. Because when you're feeling vulnerable, when you're feeling like I've been to the
Interesting,
doctor, they told me they don't know exactly what's going on. But this person says maybe they do. And they've got this thing they can sell me, maybe it'll work. If you weren't feeling vulnerable in that moment, you might easily identify that as, oh, they're just grifting. They're trying to make a buck.
So they're looking for the desperate, the last refuge.
Or the desperates find them.
Yes.
Right.
All right, the other one here, false dichotomies and polarized thinking.
Yeah, so this is another example of things that perform super well on social media. Most people can't do their own research in the way that I would interpret doing one's own research on a topic. And so what
They
you're
don't know
left
how
with,
to. In fact, half of graduate school is learning how to be a graduate student.
Right.
it's complex, not just to find the relevant research papers, but to critically interpret their study design and the results in the context of the broader literature. You're talking hundreds of hours of just time spent reading in a given topic area. No one's going to do that. Certainly not after watching an Instagram video and then questioning, is this medically accurate?
Yeah.
And so what you're left with, unfortunately, is you do have to identify people or institutions that you trust.
I was going to say trusted sources is really the key.
You're never going to go do all of the research required on every given medical topic or topic, in general in your life.
So do the institutions need to do more to make this accessible in the face of the fact that science seems to have been weaponized and turned against itself?
Yeah, I think there's a critical shortcoming in that. If people were to tune in to the 4-hour discussion section where the CDC talks about the benefits and risks of this vaccine or this intervention, you would very quickly realize these people are taking a very rigorous approach to both the medical risks and the benefits. I trust them to come up with the right answer. You never see any of that, even though it's technically publicly available, because most of the focus, is not on communicating those sort of inner details of how these decisions are made. It ends up being, this is the decision.
Or the recommendation.
Of the recommendation. For good reason, perhaps, because then doctors can take that and make that recommendation known. But I think things have shifted, even just since COVID. I think we would really benefit from personalization of these big institutions in a way that people feel they know people at them.
Okay, I'm old enough to remember, this would be mid-'80s now, early 80s, where the Surgeon General, C. Everett Koop, came out and said, you got to wear condoms, prevent the spread of AIDS. And I don't think anyone had publicly said the word condom before,
Right.
Especially not a public official. And people trusted him. Plus, he had his little...
Sex education in school, and that was about it.
Yeah, and plus, he had a certain grandpa element to him. He was a face of the nation's medicine.
Right.
Yeah.
And Fauci maybe was that, but not really. So is that the solution here?
I think that's a big part of it, is really humanizing the process of how do we come to these recommendations in the first place? And then, do we trust your recommendation because we know the process you've gone through? People are never going to sit down and do 300 hours worth of research on a topic.
As someone with a PhD in pharmacology, and I will mention immunology, explain the actual science of how vaccines work and how the body then goes to create the necessary antibodies.
It's actually the same process as when you're infected with the virus.
Right.
And so it's the same answer for both. I'll answer it from a vaccine standpoint. You get the injection in your arm.
Right.
What have you just injected? Most often little pieces of the pathogen. So what happens in your arm tissue? Pretty much nothing right there. You've got one big immune cell that comes in and scoops it up. It takes it to your draining lymph node, is what it's called. So it goes through this whole separate pathway in your body. You've got your blood circulatory system. Most people don't know. You actually have a separate, almost circulation system called
Lymphatic system.
So the white blood cells travel from wherever you got the injection. It carries it back to a lymph node, and it starts showing it to all these other immune cells. And it says, do you recognize this? No. Do you recognize this? No. Until it finds one.
Oh, it's like a lineup.
It is. And the neat part is all of those cells that are just sitting in your lymph node waiting to be shown something they
They'll
recognize.
sit there like this.
Exactly, like the guy for the car at the
So if they don't
airport.
recognize it, then what?
Yeah.
Nothing happens.
And then the one lymph node is just like, take your time. It's okay.
Exactly. The immune cell's getting tired walking along. But all of those cells were randomly generated in advance.
Right.
So before COVID ever existed, you had in your body T cells and B cells that recognized COVID. And then when you eventually got infected for the first time or got your vaccine, it was like their time to shine, basically. They're like, oh, hey, I know that one.
Right.
When that happens, that cell gets activated. It multiplies. It starts making antibodies.
Right.
They go back to your site of infection, go throughout your whole body. It also activates T cells. So T cells are the ones that recognize, oh, that friendly cell is infected with a virus. I better kill that
I
cell.
have to kill that cell.
Right, exactly. So you get this combination of antibodies that are floating around to neutralize the virus when it's in between cells, and T cells to kill the ones that are incubating virus actively. And that same process happens whether you've been infected with a virus. It still takes the piece of virus and goes to the lymph node and activates the B and T cells.
Here's something I never understood. There are people who had pretty serious side effects to the COVID vaccine. If the vaccine is doing what COVID itself would have done, does that mean they would have had those same side effects had they gotten COVID straight up?
I don't think so. I don't know of data to say one way or the other. If the severity of your vaccine response is
Vaccine doesn't know
predictive,
the data one way. That's honest. They get a more
honest
guy.
but boring. That's
I can
trade-off.
cope with that.
No, I just want to call out that when a scientist is speaking and they're honest about their work, and they don't just say, I don't know one way or another. That's honest.
I'd rather that.
Right?
Yeah, I can
But
cope
you
with
could lie
that.
to us and be really confident, and then we'll just do what you say.
Yeah, man. If you got a bad fever after the injection, you would have died from COVID. I don't know one way or the other. My suspicion is that there's probably not much of a link between the two, and also that it would be very hard to test because obviously once you are vaccinated,
You're not
then
going
when
to
you
get infected.
it's going to be.
You can't,
Yeah.
you can't.
And by the way, your infection, if you do get it, it's going to be lessened by the fact that you've been vaccinated.
Right.
It's
It's like trying to get toothpaste back in the tube.
Yeah.
Not happening. Let's talk about the less extreme misunderstandings about vaccines, starting with, can you have too many vaccinations?
The short answer is no.
Right.
There comes a point where if you keep vaccinating against a certain pathogen, you don't get additional benefit. There's actually really big results just published for HPV vaccines, 1 dose versus 2 doses.
Human papilloma virus.
That's right, the one that causes cervical cancer. Going from 1 dose to 2 doses is not that much better than 1 dose. But
Very important to know that.
right.
critically, for
But that has to be, the trials have to reveal that. Otherwise
Right.
you wouldn't know.
this is the result of decades of clinical studies.
Yeah.
Maybe to your question, though, of in general, like people talk about, oh, my child's going to receive X number of vaccines over Y number of years.
Right.
To that one, the answer is definitely no. If you consider the total number of pathogens we're exposed to on a daily basis, think about your entire gut. It's constantly being sampled for bacteria and viruses and everything. And then your immune system is secreting antibodies into your gut to regulate your gut microbiome. An additional 1 or 10 pathogens from a vaccine is a drop in the bucket compared to
Everything that's happening inside your body
That's
all
way
the time.
And by the way, I cannot emphasize enough that the comparison he gave is very common in science. You can say, will this harm me?
Right.
And yeah, but look at all the other things you're doing, and you're not worried about that harming you, and those risks are 10 times as high.
Right.
So
and it's not a harm. It's
that's very important comparison to make, and it's a statistical comparison that I don't think people are comfortable or have experience doing.
Yeah. Well, because the way they intuit is
The intuition is false.
it's false.
Yeah,
They intuit wrongly because they say, well, if I took this vaccine and this vaccine and this vaccine and this vaccine all at the same time, my body must not be able to handle that. And that is what is causing this disease or this condition or whatever. But the truth is, your body is responding to it because it's responding to that all the time.
Yeah, and separately in parallel, this goes back to the fact there's all these cells sitting in your lymph node waiting for their target.
Right.
Just because you activate this one, this other one is still available, just waiting for its target. You can activate both at the same time.
At the same time,
And they're
because
not competing.
they're doing different things. They're fighting different things. It's not like one is stepping on the other.
Right.
You know, they're both going. It's like a 5-alarm fire. One fire station is called, then a second fire station is called. They don't cancel each other out.
No.
They help each other do their thing. You know, one takes one part of the house, one takes another. So yeah.
All right, a couple of other less extreme misunderstandings to go through. Can you firstly overload the immune system, or can you boost the immune system?
Oh, great question.
That's wow.
You both cannot boost your immune system in the ways you're thinking of, nor do I think it would be a good idea to boost your immune system. You want balance in your immune system, actually. If you get too much immune activity, you know what you end up with? autoimmune disease.
Right.
If you get too little immune activity in your body, that increases your risk for cancer.
Right.
And so it's this balance between having just enough immune activity to respond to acute infections and stuff. But even if you could boost your immunity by taking some supplement, I don't know that you would want to do so.
Right.
Certainly.
It's funny because when we start out in life, that's the whole idea. It's not to keep your child away. Just let them go do whatever because they're going to encounter these pathogens naturally, and then their immune system is going to develop accordingly.
Yeah, I should say there are things you can do to reduce the function of your immune system. So you don't want to be not getting enough sleep.
Right.
Every other disease on the planet. That's basically the extent of what you want to do to be caring for your immune system. It's also going to help you with everything else.
Before we go on and bring on my next guest, why is it that some vaccines need to be boosted later on, whereas others don't?
Great question.
So in other words, you can be vaccinated for life with one kind, but another one you need a.
Measles is like that.
Is that right?
Yeah, if you got a measles shot as a child back in the 60s, you're probably going to need a booster right now.
There's two levels of variability here. One is across different pathogens. Some pathogens are capsular, and it's harder to get longer-lasting, antibody responses against what you need to get responses against. You just need to get boosted.
Right.
Those infections, if you get them, maybe you get infections more recurrently with rhinoviruses or different coronaviruses. It's not like you get infected once in your life and then you never get that pathogen again.
Right.
Over time, maybe your immunity wanes for whatever reason. So there's differences across pathogens just based on their structure.
Oh.
There's
okay.
also big
When
differences,
you say structure, you mean their physical, how the molecules would ever connect.
Yeah, and
in
how,
cells.
how that primes your
Cells,
memory immune response to be either longer lasting or not.
Interesting.
But then there's also huge differences across people in the variability of both the potency of your immune response and the duration that it lasts.
Okay.
And you can't tell based on how you feel. And so there's two levels of variability there. Over a population, it works great, but at any given person for any given pathogen, you could see hugely different persisting antibody levels 20, 30 years after vaccination.
I heard this saying, no medicine is good for anyone until it has been tested on everyone.
Wow.
Yeah,
There's
so
some truth to that, right?
absolutely.
So you can't test it on everyone because you have sample sizes, but if you test it on 1,000 people and there's a 1 in a million reaction that someone might have to it, you won't know that in that sample of 1,000.
Right. Which is the whole value of doing post-marketing surveillance, which is done very surprisingly
That's your best word,
rigorously.
surveillance. Come on. Please. Follow-up. How about that?
Post-marketing follow-up.
Follow-up, yes.
Where you've got these databases looking out for signals of potential risk, and if one pops up, that's probably anecdotal, but it serves as the basis for a rigorous investigation that you go do then afterwards.
Got it.
Right.
And so tell me, and just to end it here, tell me about the vaccine
Adverse event reporting
adverse
system.
effects reporting system. VAERS.
Yeah.
What is that?
So it's exactly that type of monitoring system where we've tested these vaccines in this number of people. It looks good in that number of people. We're not going to test it in 300 million people before we release it. So you release it. And you're getting safety signals. If the same thing starts to pop up over time, you say, well, we should go do a formal study and look if that's actually associated with the vaccine.
Gives you an excuse to focus in.
Right. For things that could be very rare that you would never see in a typical clinical trial, even if you had 10,000, 20,000 people in the clinical study.
Because it's 1 in a million or 1 in 10 million.
Right. And so there's some noise because these things are voluntarily reported, and sometimes things do happen by coincidence.
That's what the V stands for, volunteer.
Right.
Look at
Oh,
that.
no, V stands for vaccine.
Yeah, vaccine adverse event reporting system.
So this relies entirely on someone knowing it exists, logging on, and typing in some effect.
Right. So
Adverse effect.
it's often healthcare providers who will log it. They'll say the person got this vaccine.
Oh, good. So
they
there's
had this.
a professional in the loop.
Right.
Very good to know that.
But just because it's in the system doesn't mean it's necessarily related. It's a starting point for investigation, and that's where it goes wrong. People will say, look how many reports there were in the system. But of course, what happens if you vaccinate 30 million children? Some of those children are going to have other things happen to them.
That are unrelated.
Oh,
Yeah.
But
of
That may
course.
be related.
That might be related,
The
or they
bigger
may
the
not
number,
be.
Yeah.
there's some rare other thing that
Right.
it's time coincident with,
Yeah.
Right.
and there's not a cause and effect.
Right.
And so it's critical to have to identify when there are true signals. You can't rely on it to show that vaccines are dangerous for XYZ.
Right. Yes.
Interesting.
Tell me if I'm wrong here. When the COVID vaccine arrived, and it wasn't yet enough for everybody, so they did first responders and then teachers. I think that rollout felt sensible to me. All of us who remembered things like the polio vaccine and the smallpox vaccine fully expected that once you got that vaccine, you would never get COVID again. But that is not what happened. And then it's, oh, there's a new strain, and there's new this, and then people got it twice. Some people got the same strain twice. So it seems to me that fact undermines certain people's confidence
Yeah.
that was either the right vaccine or an appropriate vaccine, or whether people even knew what they were talking about.
Yeah.
We all know people who've had COVID 3-4 times. I was novid until like 3 months ago, I would say.
Yeah. So I think this is a misalignment of expectations versus reality. We know looking at other coronaviruses, because there are seasonal coronaviruses that mostly now cause the common cold, people get reinfected all the time.
Yeah.
And so there's every reason to expect with a new coronavirus, you have immunity now. That doesn't totally preclude you from infection later.
Yeah, but if I had smallpox, I expect no smallpox.
Right. And so there's huge variability across different pathogens.
Nobody told
based
us
on-
that when the vaccine came out.
Exactly.
That
So I
was a-
think
that was a
that's the shortfalling of communication.
Right.
Is
Did
saying,
they know that that was something they could have communicated at the time? Or was it still on the frontier of learning of the progress of the novelty of the virus?
there's a big part of that too, is being honest, and we don't know for sure yet. This is a new virus. Right now, if you get the vaccine, you're not going to get infected, or it's a 95% reduction in risk. Or your risk of severe disease is reduced by 90%. But how that will change 3 years from now, you can't be totally certain.
If they knew that, they needed to be honest about it, I think.
Yeah.
Because that's how science works. You know what you know at any given time, and you give the best available information. So we want everyone to watch your postings. Dr. Knock.
That's right.
Dr.Knock.
That's right. dr.noc.
And that's on TikTok, and you call that also on Instagram?
TikTok, Instagram. Yep, same name.
Excellent. Rising through 3.5 million viewers. That should be 20 million viewers, I think.
Even more than that.
Yeah,
we,
more, yeah.
we need it. We need
330 million viewers. That should.
That's
Next
what
time you
you-
come on.
The whole country.
the country.
Thanks for coming down. For
Really
this.
appreciate the invitation.
Come in-
Enjoyed the discussion.
Live into my office, and it's good to know you're in arm's reach up there in Boston. Brookline is your town.
That's right.
That's right, right across the Charles River.
Why don't
Yep.
you just give the man's address?
Sorry.
I wear a disguise at all times outside of the recording studio, so you'll never notice me in the street.
All right, when we come back, Scott Hamilton Kennedy will tell us about his film, his documentary, Shot in the Arm.
Here they are, McCrispy strips, long, tender, juicy chicken made for dipping, or rather, double dipping. But why stop there? Keep going. New McCrispy strips now at McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
On the subject of medical misinformation, we can't call that topic complete without venturing into the world of vaccine hesitancy, vaccines in general. And there's one person who's at the front of that conversation, and it's my friend, Scott Hamilton Kennedy. Scott, welcome to Star Talk.
Good to see you, Neil.
Hey, dude. You're a filmmaker.
I am a filmmaker,
So
storyteller.
documentary filmmaker.
Yeah.
Storyteller, because not all documentaries tell stories.
They try,
They're just
yeah.
informational.
They can be a little laundry listy.
Yeah, when you're laundry list, it's less compelling, I find,
Agreed.
because you know deeply, I'm guessing, that people love to have stories told to them. And why?
Yeah.
What's the origin of that?
I would say Yuval Harari said it so beautifully in his book *Sapiens* that he said that storytelling is the best tool we have available to us as human beings to get along, to agree to change things. He really put it into such an amazing context that it is the art of story we have available to us as human beings to get along, to agree to change things. He really put it into such an amazing context that it is the art of storytelling that we can use to convince each other to make this world a more functioning place.
So you made a film called Shot in the Arm,
Yeah.
which I actually had something to do with.
You did.
You invited me as a script consultant.
Yeah.
Not that I am an expert on vaccines, but that I do think deeply about how people learn science and
Yep.
what may convince them one way or another. So thank you for inviting me.
I would call you my mentor, sir, if I
Oh,
could.
no. So where did that film come from in your head?
Yeah, so I'll go all the way back to 2018. I was talking to a wonderful
Okay.
doctor, Dr. John
Were viruses
Schwartzberg.
invented in 2018 yet?
In 2018, well, you know Dr. John Schwartzberg because we got to do another film together called Food Evolution. That was a reset of the conversation on GMOs. And Dr. John Schwartzberg runs the Berkeley Wellness Letter, this fantastic letter out of Cal Berkeley that has doctors vet scientific information and then bring it back to the public in a consumable way, not dissimilar.
When you say doctors vet the scientific information, it means they read the journals and
That's
bring
right.
journal information
That's right.
to the people.
That's right.
So the people don't have to read the journals.
That's right.
They're interpreted.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's such a simple, beautiful, and very much of your world too, right? You're a wonderful translator in a way of complicated science. And he said to me, Scott, what's your next movie going to be on? You should take on these anti-vaxxers. This is fall 2018. And in my wisdom, I said, oh no, why would I need to touch them? They're going to go away. They're going to burn out. Genius as always. Cut to spring 2019, record-breaking measles outbreak, a state of emergency here in New York City in the Orthodox Jewish community. Measles outbreak. that's
After
right.
it had been declared defeated,
We were on the road to eliminating it in 2000. We
the
were.
World Health Organization, did they
That's
make
right.
these declarations?
That's right. That's my lazy research I did when I saw the state of emergency in New York City. Is I did a little research and I saw that we were about to eliminate it 2000. So what the heck is going on here? Why would we have a state of emergency if we're so close? And I called Dr. Paul Offit, who's a big part of the Shot in the Arm, and he said, Scott, it's not very complicated, but it is nefarious that there are people out there that have become to be known as anti-vaxxers who scare and convince parents to not vaccinate their children. And it's never a matter of if, it's going to be a matter of when, if you do lower those vaccine rates, that you're going to see a measles outbreak.
And measles has some, among viruses, some like unique, not unique, but it's
Highly contagious.
highly contagious.
I can stay in a room, I think it's 2 hours after. So
Just
if
floating in the air.
Floating in the air. Yeah, it's that contagious. So that I thought was enough to begin a movie. And so I began this movie in 2019. My first day shooting was at the CDC's ACIP meetings where they confirm the next vaccines that are coming out. And I had Paul Offit there, and I had one of the top anti-vaxxers there, Del Bigtree, who went on to be a dear friend of Robert Kennedy Jr.'s, went on to be Robert Kennedy Jr.'s communications director during his presidential run, but we'll come back to that. And I also filmed with Andrew Wakefield, a doctor who had his actually license taken away as his study was found to be that it was fraudulent and incorrect, and trying to make a connection between autism and the MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. So we thought we had a pretty important movie in all of those elements, and then COVID happened, and it went to another place where we had to film from lockdown. I included my family a little bit as like the all of us. And for a minute, we thought the antis might, God forbid, go away when you have a once in a century pandemic, but they got stronger and more nefarious.
How does someone judge in your cinematic world whether or not your film is propaganda?
Great. Vet it, right? Vet it.
Go vet it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Look at the experts that I have in the film. Look at the scientific studies that we point out in the film. We put them right up on the screen. We have them on our website.
And I will add, the experts you do interview, they're not saying, listen to me because I alone have this one answer.
Correct.
They're representing a scientific medical establishment.
Correct.
Right.
And you can,
And at some point, we have to reclaim the importance of the word establishment.
Yeah.
It's become a bad word. Are you from the establishment?
That's right.
Oh, that's bad.
Yeah.
No, there's a reason why an establishment exists.
The level of cynicism is very, very depressing. But back to your question about the film, vet the film. Don't take my word for it. Don't take the fact that I have the wonderful Neil deGrasse Tyson as my executive producer, which is a great honor and should make them say, hey, if Neil vetted it, that should mean something. That's fine. But vet the film and vet the words coming out of the people we refer to as antis in the film.
It is true that most propaganda films don't invite you to vet it.
That's right. But again, that goes back to I'm trying to wrap it up, but the tools that we could have on Star Talk's website, on Black Valley Films' website, on Shot in the Arm's website.
Black Valley Films is your production.
Is my production, thank you, is that says, here are the tools we use for vetting, right? They're right there. Here are the tools we use for vetting. And it's transparent.
So it needs to be more of that.
And say, hey, you trying to poke a hole in me? Do you have those tools on your website?
Yeah.
Right?
So that empowers people to verify
Yeah.
in some way or another. So, Scott, what does your film Shot in the Arm have to say about our responsibility to each other? Because that seems to be deeper than just any conversation about medicine.
Right.
It's a social
Contract. Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. No, it's a great point that this social contract became part of the film through a few different characters in the film that reminded me of it. I don't remember the last time I probably talked about it outside of making this film. Was it in grade school or something? So
Civics class?
Yeah, a simple definition of the social contract are these norms that are written or sometimes not written that have become norms. Don't drink and drive. Take out your trash. Be a decent neighbor. Be a good citizen in your community. Don't harm your children. Feed your children. All these different things. And vaccines could be is part of that, right? That you don't necessarily get a vaccine. You do get a vaccine to keep yourself safe, but sometimes you don't get a vaccine necessary for you to stay safe. You get a vaccine so you don't pass something on to somebody who's more vulnerable than you. And sadly, during COVID, we saw, it was building up long before COVID, but during COVID, we really saw kind of a bit of a disaster around our social contract, that people leaned into what they would call freedom, but it's really a version of selfishness. I'm sorry to say. It's a tough word. But
Wait, so you explored in the film that the original sort of anti-vaxxers was a community deeply embedded in liberal voting factions.
Yep.
And only under COVID was there a right-leaning faction that were not so much anti-pharma, which is the common battle cry in the left, but they were just pro-freedom.
Right.
And so their notion was, you can't inject me if I don't want you to.
That's right.
So why don't we just still allow that, but then deny them access to places where they could spread the disease?
Or we could give them their own island. It's terribly cynical and maybe even mean. But if we had an island, all these people say, I want my freedoms. Don't tell me what drugs to take. Don't touch my food. I don't want my milk to be pasteurized. I don't want fluoride in my water.